Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a story that begins in the glow of candlelight, inside a little cobbler's shop that smells of worn leather and warm beeswax. Imagine the creak of floorboards beneath your feet, the faint scratch of scissors on a workbench, and the almost comic way shoes pile up like a messy laundry basket that nobody wants to fold. You're here not just as a listener, but as a quiet traveler, wandering into a tale where help comes from the smallest, most unexpected hands. And hey, fair warning, you probably won't survive this, well, you'll fall asleep before we even get to the Elves' grand entrance. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do here. And if you're awake enough, drop your location and the local time in the comments. I love seeing this little nighttime map light up across the world, like stars chatting to each other in the dark. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step into the shoemaker's quiet shop, its door creaking open like a sigh from the past. The air is warm, but tinged with the musk of leather, the earthy sweetness of wax, and the faint bitterness of polish. Tools lie scattered as if they had stories of their own. A hammer with more dents than sense, a knife nicked from years of cutting too many stubborn hides, and a thimble that looks suspiciously like it might roll away just to spite him. The shoemaker himself, bent over his bench, glances up. His eyes are tired, but not unkind. You notice how small the space feels, not cramped, but close, like the kind of room where every sound carries. The tick of a clock on the wall feels loud enough to be a drumbeat. And as you stand there, you realize this man isn't just making shoes. He's wrestling quietly with time itself. Every stitch is a wager against hunger, every cut of leather a gamble that maybe tomorrow will be kinder. Funny thing is, shoes, those humble things on your feet, used to be a badge of pride in villages like this. History nerd fact, in medieval Europe, long pointed shoes called poulaines were so exaggerated that kings actually had to ban them in churches. Imagine showing up to prayer with toes like stilts. And yet, our shoemaker here is working on nothing so fancy, just sturdy shoes meant for farmers, shepherds, maybe the odd town clerk who still thinks he's important enough to need polish. But there's something oddly timeless about this little shop. Folklorists still argue whether this story was originally German, Czech, or even Scandinavian. It's like the elves couldn't pick one nationality, so they went pan-European, kind of like IKEA, but with better tailoring. And tucked within this uncertainty lies the beauty of fairy tales. They belong everywhere, yet they sit comfortably in one small shop too. The shoemaker wipes his brow and leans back. You can almost hear his bones pop like creaky floorboards. His hands, cracked and scarred from years of work, hover over a last piece of leather. He sighs, as if this sigh might carry his troubles away. You know the sound. It's the same sigh you give when you realize the Wi-Fi just died in the middle of a Netflix binge. He mutters something under his breath, not words you catch, but the tone is clear. Gratitude for what he has, grief for what he lacks. His wife hums faintly in the corner, her voice softer than the flicker of the candle. You notice how they move around each other like dance partners who've long forgotten the steps but still know the rhythm. There's an intimacy in this shop that pulls you closer. You find yourself glancing at scraps of half-finished shoes, like characters waiting to be born. A child's tiny boot, never finished. A lady's slipper, so delicate it seems almost embarrassed to exist. A sturdy farmer's boot, half-stitched, as if waiting for someone with muddy feet to claim it. Each pair whispers of lives lived outside these four walls, of journeys both grand and ordinary. And yet, for all the worn edges and quiet despair, there's warmth. The kind of warmth that seeps into your bones slowly, like tea steeping. The shoemaker hums along with his wife now, though he's off-key enough to make you smile. And just for a moment, you almost forget the struggles until you see the last coin on the table, gleaming in the candlelight like a solitary star. That coin is a reminder. Tomorrow may bring hunger, or maybe help. And as you linger here in the dim light, you can't help but feel that something unusual is about to slip quietly into this shop, like a whisper through a keyhole. The shoemaker rubs his eyes, the weight of another day pressing down on his shoulders like a sack of flour that never seems to empty. His workshop is quiet, the kind of quiet where even dust motes drifting in the candlelight seem to move more slowly, as if respecting his exhaustion. You notice his bench, scraped, nicked, worn from years of use, yet it still holds steady, like an old friend who never leaves even when the world feels unpredictable. He picks up a strip of leather and runs his fingers along the grain, though you can tell he's not really thinking about the leather itself. His eyes dart to that single coin sitting in a chipped bowl on the shelf. One coin, that's all that's left. It looks pitiful, like a single French fry at the bottom of the bag after a long road trip. He sighs again, a sound so deep it might echo through the cobblestones outside. You lean against the doorway of the story, watching his struggle. It isn't the kind of dramatic despair you see in movies, no fist shaking at the heavens, no sweeping violin music. Instead, it's quieter, almost ordinary. That's what makes it sting more. He loves his craft, loves the feel of a shoe well made, but life doesn't always reward love. Sometimes it rewards sheer luck, and lately, luck has been on vacation. His wife comes in with a small loaf of bread wrapped in cloth. She sets it down gently, as if it were treasure. "This will be enough for tomorrow," she whispers. You notice the way she looks at him. Not pity, not frustration, but a kind of calm faith. The shoemaker smiles faintly, though the corners of his mouth tremble. He doesn't want to admit how close they are to ruin. History nerd moment. Shoemaking wasn't a glamorous trade, but it was essential. In medieval towns, cobblers were part of the guild system, a network of craftsmen who supported one another. Shoes weren't mass-produced. Each pair was measured, cut, and stitched by hand. And yet, despite this honorable work, shoemakers often lived near poverty, especially in small villages where wealth didn't flow easily. Folklorists believe that's why stories like this one resonated. They gave hope to everyday craftsmen who dreamed of a little magic in their lives. Of course, not all scholars agree. Some argue that the tale wasn't about shoemakers at all, but about the dignity of humble work, that the elves are metaphors for inspiration itself. Others shrug and say, nah, people just like the idea of free shoes. Honestly, both explanations make sense, though free shoes still sound like the real win. The shoemaker sets aside the last of his leather, carefully smoothing it flat on the bench. He has just enough for one pair of shoes. One chance. It feels like the kind of gamble you'd make when buying a lottery ticket with the last crumpled dollar in your wallet. His fingers tremble slightly as he measures and cuts, then sets the pieces neatly aside for morning. He knows he doesn't have the strength to finish tonight. The candle flickers low, as if it, too, is weary. The shoemaker tidies his tools, hammer, awl, needle, as if arranging soldiers for a hopeless battle. He pauses over the coin once more, brushing his thumb against its ridged edge. The metal is cold, sharp, unyielding. You can almost hear his thoughts. If these shoes sell, maybe they'll eat better next week. If not, well, maybe soup from stones isn't so bad. He shuffles to bed, his steps heavy, his shoulders rounded. His wife joins him, and together they disappear behind a curtain that separates the workshop from their tiny living space. The room falls silent. The leather waits, the tools glint faintly. You can sense that the air itself holds its breath. And you, still hovering inside this tale, feel the tension like a string pulled taut. The shoemaker has done all he can. Tomorrow rests on the hope that this final pair of shoes will be enough to keep hunger from the door. You can't help but wonder what might happen in the dark hours ahead, when sleep drapes over the village and even the clocks seem to tiptoe. But for now, you sit with the shoemaker's quiet struggle. It isn't glamorous, but it's real. The kind of battle countless people have faced through history. The kind where you measure out tomorrow with scraps, sighs, and stubborn hope. The village has fallen into its nightly hush, a hush so thick it feels like a wool blanket draped over the rooftops. You step outside the shoemaker's little shop for a moment, just to notice how still the world has become. The cobblestones gleam faintly under moonlight. The thatched roofs wear their silver crowns, and even the cats have curled into silence. Somewhere far off, a dog lets out one bark, then thinks better of it, as if the night itself shushed him. Back inside, the workshop breathes with shadows. The candle has burned to a stub, its flame now a tiny stubborn dot against the dark. The leather pieces lie waiting on the bench, like puzzle fragments that no one has yet solved. The shoemaker and his wife sleep nearby, their quiet breaths mingling with the creaks of the timber beams. And then you hear it, the faintest sound, a stirring. It isn't the wind, though the rafters sigh softly. It isn't the clock, though it ticks with deliberate slowness. No, this sound is smaller. A shuffle, a tiny patter. The sort of noise you might dismiss as mice, except mice don't hum jaunty little tunes under their breath. You lean closer, your ears tuning in. The rustle grows clearer, the scuff of something soft against the bench, the squeak of tools moving though no hand touches them. You could swear you glimpse motion in the corner of your eye, quick, darting like a spark. And then, faint laughter. Not the belly-deep laughter of villagers at an alehouse, but something lighter, tinkling, almost like bells with secrets. Here's where the folklore gets fun. Across Europe, stories of nocturnal helpers abound. In Germany, they're elves, or Heinzelrunchen, famous for sneaking into shops to finish chores. In Scandinavia, you'd call them Nisse, small household spirits with red caps, known to help or hinder, depending on how kindly they were treated. Scholars still debate whether these figures were born from pagan beliefs about ancestor spirits or just from wishful thinking by overworked craftsmen. Honestly, both feel plausible, because who wouldn't want magical interns showing up at night? The shoemaker, of course, is fast asleep, missing all this. But you, lurking here as a quiet witness, watch as the air seems to shimmer. Out of the shadows step figures no taller than a loaf of bread. Their hair is wild as wind-blown straw, their ears sharp as crescent moons, and their eyes glittering like dew. And though their clothes are ragged, their movements are anything but shabby. They move with purpose, like tiny surgeons about to perform the most important operation of the century, except with leather and needles instead of scalpels. One elf hops onto the bench with the agility of a squirrel. He pats the leather pieces approvingly, then gestures to the others. They scurry up like climbers on a rock wall, dragging thread and thimbles 3 times their size. If you weren't so sleepy, you might laugh at how serious they look, as if the fate of the universe rests on these shoes. They set to work. The first elf threads a needle, squinting like a kid trying to poke a straw into a juice box hole. Another hammers nails so fast his arms blur, tap, 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 like raindrops drumming on a roof. A third pulls stitches taut, humming what sounds suspiciously like a lullaby you half remember from childhood. And together they work in rhythm, a tiny symphony of sound, snip, pull, tap, hum. And here's the quirky tidbit. In some old versions of the tale, the elves were said to work completely naked. Don't worry, tonight's story will keep things PG. But historians have noted that nakedness in folklore often symbolized purity or freedom from shame. Still, I can't help imagining them holding a union meeting about workplace conditions, saying, "Okay, team, clothes are optional, but precision stitching is mandatory." The night thickens. The shoemaker dreams on, unaware that destiny is being rewritten a few feet from his bed. The elves' tiny hands fly, faster and faster, until the scraps of leather begin to transform. Slowly, impossibly, a pair of shoes take shape, perfect shoes, with seams straighter than rulers, polish that glows without wax, and soles so neat they look carved by angels. You can't help but marvel. This isn't just craftsmanship, it's artistry, the kind of work that could make even a picky noble gasp. And as the last stitch is pulled, the elves step back, admiring their creation. They grin at each other, their teeth flashing white in the candle's dying glow. One claps his hands, another bows dramatically, and a third, just to be cheeky, tries the shoe on his own tiny foot, wobbling around like a toddler in Dad's boots. Then, as silently as they arrived, they vanish back into the shadows, leaving only the perfect shoes on the bench. The room falls still again, as if nothing ever stirred. The candle flickers once more, then dies. All that remains is the quiet breathing of the shoemaker and his wife, and two shoes that gleam with promise under the moon.
The morning slips into the workshop like honey dripping into tea. Slow, golden, and quiet, the shoemaker yawns awake, his joints cracking in protest as he shuffles to his bench. His wife trails behind, tying her hair back with the kind of efficiency only born of habit. Both of them expect to see nothing more than leather scraps and yesterday's despair. But then, pause. His eyes widen. He leans forward, squinting, as if the shoes on the bench might be a mirage. Perfect shoes. Not just good, not just passable enough to keep your toes dry. These are shoes so fine, they look like they belong to someone who would actually pay to skip the mud puddles. The shoemaker lifts them gently, turning them over in his hands. The stitching is flawless, tighter than the laces on a brand new pair of sneakers. The soles gleam with a polish he knows he never applied. Even the smell is different, richer, cleaner, like leather that just walked out of a spa treatment. His wife gasps softly, covering her mouth with her hand. "Did you?" she begins, but her husband just shakes his head slowly, still staring at the craftsmanship. You can almost hear his thoughts spinning. "I didn't make these. I couldn't make these. So who did?" Now, here's a fun little historical aside. In the Middle Ages, shoes weren't just about comfort. They were status symbols. The wealthy flaunted shoes with longer points or fancy embroidery, while the poor made do with sturdy, practical boots. In fact, there were laws, called sumptuary laws, that restricted who could wear certain types of shoes. So a pair of perfect, almost noble-looking shoes suddenly appearing in a humble shop? That's not just surprising, it's socially explosive. And yet the shoemaker doesn't worry about laws right now. He worries about breakfast. He gently sets the shoes in the shop window the way a baker might place a perfect cake on display. Within the hour, a customer wanders by. He stops, stares, blinks twice. You can practically see the math equations scribbling behind his eyes. These are too fine for this shop, and yet they're here. He hurries inside, coins jangling like applause in his pouch. "How much?" he asks, almost breathless. The shoemaker stammers a price lower than what the shoes are worth, but higher than anything he's dared to ask in weeks. The customer slaps the coins down and snatches up the shoes like they might vanish if he hesitates. And just like that, the shoemaker has money again. Enough to buy more leather, enough to keep the candle burning, the bread fresh, the hope alive. Of course, he can't stop marveling. All day he turns the mystery over in his mind like a riddle. Who made the shoes? He knows his wife didn't. He knows he didn't sleepwalk with sudden master-level skill. And unless the neighbor's cat has a secret stitching hobby, something stranger is at work here. Here's a fun little historical aside. In some versions of the story, the shoemaker assumes the shoes must be the work of saints or angels. Folklorists point out that stories like this often blurred the line between religion and folklore, with supernatural helpers sometimes seen as divine gifts. Others argue the opposite, that these tales were about grounding miracles in everyday life, suggesting that kindness could arrive from unexpected earthly places. No consensus, of course. Folklorists love to debate like it's their full-time sport. By evening, the shoemaker has bought fresh leather, enough for 2 pairs of shoes. He works carefully, cutting and laying the pieces out on his bench. His wife watches him with a quiet smile, though her eyes flick to the window, half expecting more mystery to sneak in with the night. As the candle burns low, the shoemaker sets the leather aside, just as before. His heart beats with a mix of worry and anticipation. Will the unseen helpers return? Was last night a dream, or the start of something stranger? He tidies his tools once more, his hands steady, but his mind restless. He and his wife retreat to bed, whispering about what tomorrow may bring. The shop grows silent again, but the shoes from last night, now gone to a wealthy customer, have left their mark. They've planted something new in this little home. Not just hope, but expectation.
The shoemaker wakes earlier this time, half afraid he's imagined everything. His breath catches as he pads across the wooden floor, candle stub in hand. The workshop looks the same at first: scattered tools, shadows clinging to the rafters, scraps of leather resting like silent promises. But then he blinks, and there it is again. Shoes. 2 perfect pairs, gleaming as though they had strolled straight out of a royal carriage. He picks one up reverently, running his fingers along the stitching. It's the kind of work that would make guild masters jealous, the sort of craftsmanship that could start rumors if shown in the wrong tavern. His wife joins him, eyes shining, and for a moment you can see the years of worry melt from their faces like frost dissolving under the morning sun. The marketplace that day buzzes like a hive. People crowd around the shoemaker's stall, marveling at his sudden turn of skill. "How did he manage it?" whispers one. "Luck of the moon," mutters another. By the time the sun dips low, the shoes are gone, coins heavy in his pouch, and murmurs heavier still in the air. Now, let's slip in a history nugget. Medieval markets weren't just for buying bread and gossip. They were social theaters where reputation mattered as much as product. If a craftsman suddenly produced flawless work overnight, tongues wagged. Some whispered witchcraft. Others muttered about deals with spirits. And somewhere, inevitably, a jealous rival grumbled, "He must be cheating." Folklorists argue this story reflects that anxiety. Ordinary workers wondering how success could appear so suddenly. Was it skill, luck, or something hidden? Back in the shop, the shoemaker counts his earnings with trembling fingers. He has enough to buy more leather, better leather. This time he splurges: rich calfskin, soft suede, pieces so fine he can't imagine wasting them on clumsy hands. He cuts the patterns carefully, laying them out like offerings. And as he does, you notice something. His movements are slower, steadier, almost respectful. It's as if he knows the scraps will soon be transformed into miracles. His wife tidies the bench, humming softly. She adds a small sprig of lavender to the window, its scent drifting through the room like a blessing. You can tell she's beginning to believe, too, that whatever forces are at work here, they're on the couple's side. Night falls, and again the village drapes itself in silence. The shoemaker and his wife settle into bed, though their whispers carry through the curtain. He's half afraid to hope, half ashamed at how much he does. She simply smiles in the dark, certain that tomorrow will bring surprises. And once again, the workshop stirs. Tiny footsteps patter, shadows lengthen. The elves return, their movements brisk, their laughter like wind chimes caught in the secret breeze. They set to work with the same practiced rhythm: snip, stitch, hammer, polish. One elf perches on the shoemaker's awl like it's a throne, barking tiny instructions to the others. Another tries on a piece of suede as if it were a cape, spinning dramatically before getting back to work. You can't help but chuckle at their mix of mischief and mastery. Here's the quirky tidbit. In some lesser-known tales, elves weren't always benevolent. They might sour milk, tangle hair, or trip travelers just for sport. But in this story, their mischief is softened into charm. Scholars wonder if this was deliberate, whether storytellers reshaped older, scarier elf lore into something gentler, more palatable for bedtime. Think of it as the Disney edit of folklore. By dawn, another two pairs gleam on the bench. The shoemaker wakes to find them, eyes wide once again, though this time his shock is tempered with gratitude. He presses his hand to his chest, whispering thanks into the quiet. His wife joins him, resting her hand over his, both of them gazing at the shoes as if they've stumbled into a dream too kind to last. And yet, as you linger in the workshop's warmth, you sense the story turning. With every pair of shoes, with every coin earned, the shoemaker steps closer, not just to fortune, but to the mystery he longs to solve.
The marketplace thrums with life, louder than usual, as if the whole village has caught the scent of something remarkable. You weave through the crowd alongside the shoemaker, his arms heavy with boxes that creak under the weight of perfectly made shoes. Stalls overflow with turnips, smoked fish, and cloth dyed in muted colors, but none of it gathers as much attention as the shoemaker's table. He sets the shoes out, each pair lined neatly, and the effect is immediate. Customers swarm like bees to clover, their voices rising in a mix of awe and bargaining. A nobleman's steward eyes a pair of sleek boots with suspicion, then snaps them up before anyone else dares to outbid him. Farmers, merchants, even the baker's wife, everyone wants a piece of the shoemaker's sudden brilliance. Coins clink into his pouch faster than he can count, the metallic rhythm almost musical. The shoemaker's cheeks flush with a warmth he hasn't felt in years, not just relief, but pride. His wife, standing beside him, accepts compliments with modest nods, though her eyes twinkle as though she knows a secret no one else does. Of course, word spreads quickly in a town like this. By midday, gossip curls through the air like wood smoke. "Did you see the stitching?" someone whispers. "Magic, surely," another insists. "Maybe he hired a hidden apprentice," a third speculates. And inevitably, there's the jealous muttering from a rival cobbler at the far end of the market. Too good to be true. Here's your history tidbit. Markets were more than trade centers. They were reputational battlefields. For craftsmen, a single stroke of luck could mean the difference between survival and ruin. And while guilds tried to regulate quality, stories like this reveal the undercurrent of suspicion. Was extraordinary talent a gift or a trick? Scholars still argue whether such tales reflect admiration for divine providence or anxiety about cheating fate. Either way, the shoemaker's sudden success feels like both a blessing and a gamble. You notice too how the shoemaker carries himself differently now. His back is straighter, his voice steadier when customers ask for prices. It's as though each sale lifts a little of the burden that's bent him over for years. His wife slips a coin into her apron pocket, her hand brushing over it with a private smile. This money means fresh bread, warmer clothes, perhaps even a new blanket for the winter ahead. By evening, the shoemaker's table is empty. Every pair has sold. He tucks the pouch of coins against his chest like a heartbeat and hurries home with his wife, their steps quick with excitement. In their little kitchen, they sit at the table counting the earnings, more money than they have held in months. The coins gleam under the lamplight, scattered like golden crumbs left by fate itself. And yet, even in the joy of prosperity, a quiet curiosity gnaws at the shoemaker. He runs his fingers over the coins, but keeps glancing toward the workshop, where scraps of leather lie waiting. His wife notices the look in his eyes. "You're thinking of them," she says softly. He nods. Because success is sweet, but mystery is sweeter. And though the villagers chatter and the pouch grows heavy, the shoemaker can't stop wondering,
Who are these unseen helpers that turn his scraps into treasures? Here's a quirky little folkloric aside. Some storytellers describe this growing fortune as a test, not a gift. Was the shoemaker meant to hoard his wealth or use it wisely? Folklorists debate whether these stories carried moral lessons about generosity, or whether they were simply cozy reminders that sometimes luck comes when you least expect it. Either way, you sense that the shoemaker's heart, anchored in gratitude, will matter more than the coins in his hand. Night falls, and once again, leather waits on the bench. The shoemaker tidies his tools with deliberate care now, each gesture almost ceremonial. He and his wife exchange a knowing glance as they slip into bed. Neither says it aloud, but both expect the soft patter of tiny footsteps before the night is through.
Midnight tiptoes in again, as faithful as a well-wound clock, and the shoemaker lies awake, staring at the low beams of his ceiling. His wife's breathing is steady beside him, but you can tell she's pretending to sleep too, both of them listening for that same curious rhythm, the scuttle, the tap, the faint giggle that doesn't quite belong to human throats. This time, curiosity outweighs fatigue. The shoemaker gently rises, careful not to creak the bed, and pads barefoot across the wooden floor. The air is cool, tinged with the faint musk of leather and oil. He eases the workshop door open just a sliver and peers inside. What he sees could make your eyebrows do cartwheels. Tiny figures, no taller than a loaf of bread, dart about the bench with an energy that would put most toddlers on a sugar rush to shame. They are elves, slender, quick, dressed in scraps of cloth that look like leaves stitched with moonlight. Their hands move faster than logic should allow, needles flashing like lightning as they pull thread taut and hammer soles into place with precision you'd expect from a surgeon, not a shoemaker. One elf balances on the edge of a shoe, tongue sticking out in concentration, while another leaps across the bench carrying a piece of leather twice his size, looking like an ant lugging home a crumb. Their teamwork is absurdly graceful, almost like a choreographed dance. And here's the kicker. They do it all while humming, soft, eerie tunes that sound somewhere between lullabies and jokes you're not in on. The shoemaker presses his eye closer, hardly daring to breathe. His wife has crept up beside him now, her nightcap drooping over her brow as she clutches his sleeve. Together they watch in astonishment, neither speaking, afraid that the tiniest whisper might break the spell. Here's a little historical nugget. The idea of elves as nighttime workers wasn't just whimsy. In medieval Europe, there were genuine household traditions about brownies or kobolds, spirits who helped with chores if treated kindly, but who vanished in a huff if they felt unappreciated. Folklorists can't agree whether these beings were seen as protective household gods, or just excuses people used when they woke up to clean shoes without remembering doing it themselves. Meanwhile, back at the bench, one elf loses his balance, tumbles headfirst into a pile of thread, and pops out with it wrapped around him like a toga. The others laugh, high, chiming laughter that would melt even the sternest landlord's heart. The shoemaker stifles a chuckle, covering his mouth, but his wife nudges him sharply. After all, no one wants to be the guy who scared off magical free labor with a badly timed snort. As the night deepens, the elves finish pair after pair, lining the shoes in perfect rows, like proud children displaying artwork. The craftsmanship is impeccable, every stitch so precise it could win a medal at an Olympic sewing event if such a thing existed. And maybe it should. Finally, just before dawn begins to pale the window, the elves tidy the scraps with the same meticulousness they bring to the shoes. One pauses, pats the bench as if checking their work, then vanishes with the others in a blur of motion. No door opens, no crack widens. They simply slip into the shadows and dissolve, leaving the workshop utterly silent. The shoemaker and his wife stand frozen a moment longer, hearts thumping. Then she whispers, "We must do something for them." This line is not just gratitude talking, it's foreshadowing. In folklore, the idea of reciprocity was central. Gifts from unseen helpers were not to be taken for granted. Folklorists can't agree whether these beings were seen as protective household gods or just excuses people used when they woke up to clean shoes without remembering doing it themselves. Back in bed, the shoemaker lies awake, eyes wide, replaying every movement he saw. Mystery solved, yes, but in truth, it's only deepened. For if elves can stitch shoes with better skill than any human hand, what else might they be capable of when no one is watching?
The morning sunlight slants across the workshop, and every polished shoe gleams like a jewel in its box. The shoemaker and his wife stand over the rows, still dazed by what they witnessed hours earlier. Their breaths come out slow, reverent, as though they're in a chapel instead of surrounded by scraps of leather and glue pots. The shoes, however, need no prayers. They speak for themselves. Stitches so fine they could be mistaken for embroidery, soles so seamless it feels criminal to walk on them, shapes molded so naturally they might as well have grown from the earth. Customers notice. Oh, they notice. By noon, the doorbell jingles with a stream of buyers. A wealthy merchant lifts one pair to the light, muttering, "Why, these look fit for a king," before handing over coins enough to buy half the town's bread. The shoemaker tries to act casual. "Oh yes, I've been practicing a new stitch," but inside he's giggling like someone who just pulled off a heist without being caught. His wife, meanwhile, plays the role of gracious shopkeeper, pocketing payments with hands steady as stone. Between you and me, she's already calculating how much butter, flour, and maybe even a few ribbons this new fortune will bring. Now, here's a fascinating historical aside. In many versions of this tale, the shoemaker never claims credit for the elves' work, and that's important. Medieval Europe placed a lot of value on humility, especially for tradesfolk. Boast about your skills too loudly, and someone might accuse you of witchcraft, or worse, try to tax you harder. But scholars still argue whether this story was a morality tale about modesty, or just a nice bit of bedtime reassurance for poor artisans. But let's bring it back. With every passing day, the shoemaker's fortune improves. The once empty pantry now holds sacks of flour, jars of honey, and even the occasional wheel of cheese that squeaks with decadence. The couple laugh more often, the shoemaker hums at his bench, and his wife, freed from the dread of hunger, experiments with recipes, some edible, some questionably edible. And yet, beneath the joy, there's a nagging awareness. Because at night, when the household grows quiet, both of them listen for the telltale scuffle, and it always comes. Midnight arrives like a faithful delivery service, bringing the tap of tiny hammers, the sweep of tiny feet, the eerie but comforting hum of voices that don't quite belong to this world. The shoemaker, tempted night after night to throw open the door and thank them properly, restrains himself. His wife, ever more practical, reminds him they might vanish if we disturb them. It's a rule older than they are. Never startle a miracle at work. One night, though, curiosity gnaws so sharply he can't resist. He peers through the crack again. This time, he notices something new. One of the elves pauses, presses a hand to his tiny back, and stretches with a groan. Another's toes peek through the ragged edge of a tunic, worn thin for too many nights of hard labor. The shoemaker's heart tightens. These creatures, miraculous as they are, seem oddly fragile. It's almost comical, isn't it? Immortal beings, masters of leathercraft, undone by bad tailoring, like watching Superman trip over a loose shoelace. But the shoemaker's wife doesn't laugh. She sees their bare arms, the frayed hems, and whispers, "We owe them more than we can ever repay." Here's a little-known tidbit. In German folklore, elves, or Wichtelmännchen, were often described as wearing simple, shabby clothes, if they wore anything at all. Some stories claim they were naked entirely, which feels like an HR violation waiting to happen. Folklorists debate whether their ragged state symbolized purity, servitude, or just a convenient excuse for why no one ever described their fashion sense. Still, the sight tugs at the couple's conscience. They lie awake afterward, the image of bent backs and worn clothes burned into their minds. Wealth and comfort no longer feel like enough. Gratitude must take form. And the shoemaker's wife, sharp-eyed and practical, already knows what must be done. She leans over in the dim light, whispers firmly, "We will make them gifts." And just like that, the next act of the tale stirs to life. The idea plants itself in your head like a seed dropped into soft soil. Gifts. Yes, that feels right. Not money, not food, but something stitched with their own hands. After all, what could shoemakers possibly give to elves who already outperform them in leatherwork? Exactly. Something outside the workshop. Something warm. Something human. The wife is the first to put it into words. Clothes. They need clothes. Her voice is resolute, like she's already cut the pattern in her mind. The shoemaker blinks, then nods slowly. He's never been much good with cloth. His talents end where the leather ends, but he sees the sense in it. He's seen those little shoulders shivering, those bare toes poking out, and every memory of that sight makes his heart ache. So, the plan begins. By day, the shoemaker works at his bench as usual, hammering nails and buffing polish until his hands glisten with wax. But by evening, when the last customer leaves and the workshop grows quiet, the wife spreads out fabric across the table. Not scraps, no. She insists on using the best wool and linen they can afford, bought with the very coins the elves earned them. And here comes a neat historical fact. In the Middle Ages, tailoring wasn't a casual skill. Cloth was expensive, and sewing clothes was often left to specialized craftsmen. A household trying to make its own garments was either very thrifty or very ambitious. Folklorists wonder if this part of the tale is meant to show the shoemaker's wife as resourceful beyond her role, stepping into another craft with love as her guide. Her stitches aren't perfect at first. The shoemaker chuckles gently when a sleeve comes out longer than the other, or when trousers puff strangely at the knee. "They'll look like tiny balloon animals," he jokes, and she swats his arm with the needle still threaded. But slowly, steadily, her hands remember the rhythm. Each night, the pile of finished garments grows. Little shirts, tiny trousers, coats lined with soft wool, and stockings so small you could slip them over your thumb. Meanwhile, the shoemaker decides he won't be entirely useless. If he can't sew cloth, he can at least stick to what he knows. And so, on his bench beside her, he begins crafting miniature shoes. Not just sturdy ones, but masterpieces. Tiny boots with polished buckles, slippers with silk ties, even a pair of elegant pointed shoes that look suspiciously like something an elf would strut around in while demanding rent. Now, here's a quirky tidbit you might enjoy. In some variations of the tale, the elves vanish once they receive clothes, never to return. Scholars argue endlessly over why. Some say the gift of clothes frees them from bondage, like giving socks to house elves in Harry Potter. Others think it symbolizes the idea that generosity should end cycles of dependency. You repay kindness, and the story closes. But no one really knows. Folklore is stubbornly vague like that. Back to the workshop. The couple's evenings become oddly joyful. They laugh at their clumsy attempts, tease each other, and dream about how the elves will react. There's something almost romantic in the project, a quiet intimacy that binds them tighter than hardship ever did. And you find yourself grinning at the thought of two humans stitching away by candlelight for creatures they've never even spoken to. By the time winter deepens and frost etches its signature on every window pane, the gifts are ready. A full set for each elf. Coats, trousers, shirts, stockings, and shoes polished so bright they could double as mirrors. The shoemaker and his wife lay them out carefully on the workbench, arranging them as though dressing invisible mannequins. And then comes the hard part: waiting. Midnight ticks closer, the air heavy with anticipation. The shoemaker fiddles with a pair of tiny boots until his wife slaps his hand away. "Stop that! You'll smudge them!" They retreat to their hiding place, hearts thudding like children who've set a trap for Santa Claus. Outside, the wind rattles shutters. Inside, the candles gutter low. The world seems to hold its breath. And at last, the sound comes. Soft steps, whispered voices, the familiar rustle of tiny workers. Only this time, no scraps of leather await them. No unfinished shoes, only rows of garments gleaming in the candlelight. The elves halt. Silence. A silence so thick you could spread it on toast. Then, laughter. Not cruel, but joyous, bubbling up like a brook after thaw. Their tiny hands reach out, stroking wool, tugging at stockings, marveling at stitches meant just for them. And you, crouched in the shadows with the shoemaker and his wife, feel your own throat tighten, because kindness, in its purest form, has a way of making even the hardest hearts melt. The elves don't hesitate. They throw off their ragged cloth scraps and slip into the gifts with the kind of giddy delight you'd expect from toddlers at a dress-up chest. One elf pulls on trousers so snug he struts across the bench like he's walking a fashion runway. Another twirls in his little wool coat, spinning until he crashes into a pile of shavings. The third wiggles into stockings, then flexes his toes as if he's just discovered the joy of socks. Honestly, you've probably done the same thing when slipping into fresh laundry. Don't deny it. The shoemaker and his wife peek from their hiding place, faces glowing. For once, it feels less like spying and more like being let in on a secret party. The elves chatter in voices too quick to catch, their laughter chiming like bells. Then one of them, clearly the ringleader, slips into a pair of boots polished to such a sheen that he actually checks his reflection in the leather. You almost expect him to wink at himself. Now, here's your folklore nugget for the night. In many cultures, giving clothes to supernatural beings is a turning point. In Scottish and Irish stories, brownies, helpful household spirits, disappear the moment they're offered garments. Some scholars say this reflects class tensions from the past. Servants didn't want payment in kind, but freedom, and clothes were symbolic of independence. Others argue it's just a cautionary tale reminding you not to ruin a good thing by being too generous. Like when someone offers you just one more cookie and you realize they've already eaten the entire tray. Back to the scene. The elves break into a song. It's not melodic in the traditional sense, it's more like chanting and giggling at once. But it has rhythm, a kind of joy that fills the workshop like light spilling through cracks. They clap their tiny hands, stomp their booted feet, and the sound rattles through the wooden beams. The shoemaker swears later that the hammer on his bench actually jumped in time to their beat. The wife clutches her husband's hand. She's laughing quietly, but there's something else in her eyes, tears glimmering in the candlelight. Because she knows, as you do, that this moment isn't just about warmth or gratitude, it's about dignity. These little beings, so often invisible, are now wrapped in something made for them with love. It's hard not to get a lump in your throat, even if you're the type who claims you never cry at movies. And then comes the twist. The elves, once dressed, glance around the workshop as if remembering something. They exchange looks, nodding solemnly. The ringleader raises his tiny hand almost like a toast, and the others mimic him. They chant a few words, nonsense syllables to your ears, but weighty enough to feel like an oath. This is the part folklorists still argue about. What do those words mean? Some versions of the tale suggest it's a blessing, a farewell gift ensuring the shoemaker's future prosperity. Others hint it's more of a goodbye ritual, the elves acknowledging their debt has been repaid. No one can agree, but what's clear is this.
Clothed and proud, the elves will not return to cobble shoes again. The shoemaker and his wife don't know this yet, of course. They just watch as the elves, still singing, leap off the bench one by one. Their new boots thud softly against the floor, then pad toward the door. They don't bother with the latch, because of course they don't. With a shimmer, they slip right through the wood itself, leaving only faint echoes of laughter behind. The workshop falls silent, too silent. For the first time in weeks, there are no rhythmic taps, no scurrying steps, no playful chaos. Just the couple crouched in the shadows, holding each other's hands tighter than they realize. The shoemaker whispers, "They're gone." His wife nods, lips pressed, torn between joy for the elves and sorrow for herself. It feels like saying goodbye to friends who never even knew your names. But here's the kicker. As dawn filters through frosty glass, the shoemaker notices something strange. On the bench where the clothes had been, a small pile of leather scraps remains, cut precisely as if waiting for someone skilled enough to finish the job. A silent nudge, perhaps, that the work is now his alone. And so, as the morning bells ring in town, the shoemaker and his wife rise from their hiding place. They step back into their workshop, their home, their lives, changed forever.
The shoemaker and his wife stand in the stillness of their workshop. The laughter of the elves still seems to echo, lingering in the wood grain of the benches, in the curling shavings on the floor, even in the smell of polished leather. You know that feeling when you turn off the radio but swear you can still hear the tune faintly in your head? That's the room now, charged but empty. The wife touches the bench where the tiny clothes had been tried on, her fingers brushing the faint scuff marks left by the elves' boots. She smiles, but it's the bittersweet smile of someone who knows a good thing has passed. At least, she says softly, we had the chance to thank them in our way. The shoemaker nods, though his heart feels oddly hollow. For weeks, the elves had transformed his nights into a magical spectacle, a nightly miracle. Now, that chapter is closed. But sometimes closure comes dressed not as sorrow, but as quiet resolve. You can feel it forming in him already, this vow to continue the work, to honor the gift. And here's a historical tangent for your sleepy brain. In many medieval European towns, craftsmen like shoemakers were part of guilds, strict organizations that regulated training, quality, and trade secrets. Guilds had elaborate rituals, some so secretive that historians still argue whether they borrowed from older pagan practices. The shoemaker in this tale is guildless, an independent worker. That independence would have been both freedom and burden. The elves, in a way, gave him the leg up guilds might have denied. Think of it as getting into Harvard without the student loans. The day after the elves depart, the shoemaker lays out his tools with newfound focus. There's no waiting to see what the night will bring. Instead, he shapes the leather himself, cuts patterns carefully, stitches with precision. His hands are steady, his eyes sharper, as if the elves' speed and skill had rubbed off on him. You've probably felt that boost too, like when you watch a cooking video and suddenly think, yes, I could flambe this onion without setting my eyebrows on fire. By midday, a single pair of shoes gleams on the bench, finished entirely by his own hands. And not just any shoes. These are his finest yet, crafted with the patience of someone who has watched greatness up close and now dares to reach for it himself. His wife beams at him, pride warming her voice. She says, "You see? They've left you more than shoes. They've left you courage." Ah, courage. It's a word tossed around in fairy tales like sprinkles on cupcakes, but here it's practical, almost ordinary. It's the courage to keep hammering, keep sewing, even when there are no invisible hands to finish the job for you. And that kind of courage, the kind hidden in daily tasks, might be rarer than dragon slaying. Now, a quirky tidbit for you. In some German regions, the elves in this story were said to return occasionally after being given clothes, not to work, but to check in. peeking through windows or laughing in the rafters. Folklorists argue whether this was an attempt to soften the sadness of their departure for listeners, like a TV spin-off that brings back your favorite character for a cameo, just so you don't riot. But for our shoemaker and his wife, there are no more midnight helpers. Only the memory of laughter and the sight of their shop bustling with customers again. Because here's the real kicker. Word has spread. People in town whisper about the quality of the shoes, about how the humble little shop on the corner now turns out work fit for nobility. Even if they don't know about the elves, the results speak loudly enough. Orders pile up. Coins clink in the till. The wife keeps the workshop swept, the tools sharp, the leather neatly stacked. She hums as she works, sometimes echoing the strange rhythm of the elves' song without even realizing it. And the shoemaker, though his fingers ache from long hours, feels lighter than he has in years. Each pair of shoes is not just a product, it's a promise, a continuation of the gift. One night, as the couple sit by the fire, the shoemaker muses aloud, "Do you think they'll ever come back?" His wife, gazing into the flames, shakes her head gently. "No," she says, "but I think they left a part of themselves with us." And here's where scholars debate. Was this tale meant to reassure hard-working folk that unseen forces might reward their perseverance? Or was it meant to remind them that miracles fade, but discipline endures? No one can agree. What we do know is this. The shoemaker doesn't crumble when the magic ends. Instead, he carries it forward, weaving wonder into every stitch. By the time the fire crackles low and the couple drift toward sleep, their hearts are steady. The elves may be gone, but the midnight gift remains, woven into leather, thread, and memory. Morning breaks differently now in the shoemaker's life. Before, he would wake with a mixture of anxiety and dread, the way you might feel when checking your bank account after a long weekend. But now, his mornings feel more like a slow exhale. He stretches, rises, and walks into the workshop with quiet confidence. The benches no longer hold surprise shoes, but they do hold the certainty of his own hands, his own craft. His wife notices the change too. Where once his shoulders hunched under invisible weights, now they square with steady pride. "You look taller," she teases one morning, pouring him a cup of warm milk. "Not taller," he replies with a grin, "just less bent." Funny how even small miracles straighten the spine. And here's a fun cultural side note. In many European folk traditions, the act of working with leather was considered borderline magical. Leather, after all, comes from animals, living beings transformed into something enduring and useful. Craftsmen, like shoemakers, were thought to carry a subtle, mystical link to nature's cycles. To wear their shoes was, in a sense, to walk with the strength of the beast beneath your feet. If that's not fairy tale adjacent, I don't know what is. The shoemaker's customers notice the transformation too. They murmur to each other in the market, "His shoes fit better than anyone's. They last through the hardest winters. They feel light, as if made by unseen hands." His shop becomes not just a place of business, but a place of quiet wonder. People walk in with tired souls and walk out with a spring, as if his shoes hold more than stitches, perhaps a bit of enchantment left over from the elves. And doesn't that sound familiar? You've probably owned something like that yourself, a sweater, a book, a piece of jewelry that carried a little more than its material worth. Not magical, exactly, but imbued with memory, with warmth, with something that can't be measured. That's the shoemaker's work now. At night, he sometimes dreams of the elves, not their faces, which were always blurred in the lamplight, but their laughter, their tiny hands moving in quicksilver motions, their joy in the work. The dreams don't leave him longing, they leave him grateful. He wakes each time with a smile, as if their presence lingers not in the workshop, but in his very heartbeat. One winter evening, the wife sits sewing by the fire. She holds up a child's sock she's been mending and says softly, Do you think somewhere out there, another poor man or woman is waking to find their burdens lifted by unseen helpers? The shoemaker sets down his hammer and considers. I hope so. But even if not, perhaps they'll hear our story, and that will be enough. And that's the secret, isn't it? Fairy tales are not just about the events within them. They're about how they ripple outward. This tale of elves and shoemakers was told again and again across Europe, passed by candlelight and hearthfire, embroidered with each retelling. Maybe that's why we still hold it close today. Not because we expect elves to appear in our kitchens, but because we understand the longing behind the story, the hope that kindness, however small, might transform a life. And here's a curious historical twist. In some Scandinavian versions of similar tales, the helpers weren't elves at all, but hidden folk who demanded offerings of food rather than clothes. Leave them porridge, and they'd bless your home. Forget, and mischief followed. It's a reminder that stories shift like rivers, carving new paths depending on the soil of culture and memory. The shoemaker's elves, then, are one branch of a great family tree of helper spirits, each culture shaping them into what it most needed. By spring, the shoemaker's shop has become the busiest in town. He employs apprentices now, young boys eager to learn, wide-eyed when told of the elves. He doesn't embellish the tale. He simply says, "They helped me once, and I am helping you now." That's how such gifts should move forward. And in that statement lies the moral, gentle but firm. Miracles are seeds, not fruit. They're meant to be planted in new hands, new hearts. The wife watches all of this unfold with quiet joy. She knows the elves may never return, but she also knows they don't need to. Their work is alive in every pair of shoes that leaves the workshop, in every apprentice who hammers a nail, in every step taken by someone walking lighter than before. And maybe, just maybe, the elves are watching from some hidden place, their laughter rippling through the rafters of the night, pleased at how well their gift has grown.
The seasons circle again, as they always do, and the shoemaker finds himself living in a rhythm that feels less like survival and more like music. Each morning, the clatter of tools on wood and leather is his melody. Each evening, the soft hum of his wife's sewing and the crackle of fire are his lullaby. Funny, isn't it? A man who once thought he might not make it through the month now lives as though his days were stitched together with invisible golden thread. Customers no longer simply come to him for shoes. They come for stories. Is it true? They ask in hushed voices while trying on a new pair of boots. Did little beings really appear at night and help you? The shoemaker never denies it, but he never quite confirms it either. He smiles, shrugs, and says, "The shoes speak for themselves." And people lean in, as if his silence itself were part of the magic. That's the power of folklore. It thrives on mystery. Scholars often point out that the Grimm brothers' version of this tale was far gentler than many others in their collection. Unlike the grim punishments or dark warnings in stories like Hansel and Gretel or The Robber Bridegroom, this one is all light. A gift, a kindness, a quiet gratitude. Folklorists debate why. Was it because people needed comfort during hard winters, or because the shoemaker's simple humility was seen as more worthy of reward than bravery or cunning? To this day, no one agrees. And honestly, isn't that disagreement part of the charm? Like the elves themselves, the truth is quick, nimble, and always half-hidden. His wife, meanwhile, becomes something of a legend in her own right. People in the village whisper about her skill with cloth and thread. She clothed the elves, they say, and that's why their blessings linger. It's a funny kind of fame, like being known for knitting sweaters for an audience you can't see. But she accepts it with good humor. Sometimes when she sells a hand-stitched apron or mended sock, she jokes, "Careful now, you never know who might try it on when you're not looking." The couple grows older, but not bitter. That's important. Fairy tales often fade when their heroes age, as if youth alone is where the story lives. But not here. Their years only deepen the warmth. The shoemaker, with grayer hair and slower hands, still makes shoes that feel alive. His wife, with eyes that wrinkle when she laughs, still hums as she sews. Together, they've made their home into a living continuation of the elves' midnight gift. Every so often, when the moon hangs heavy and silver over the village, the shoemaker leaves a scrap of leather on the bench, not because he expects help, he knows better by now, but because he enjoys the ritual. It's a small nod of gratitude, a kind of nightly prayer in the language of stitches and soles. In the morning, the leather is always untouched, but that doesn't matter. The act itself is enough. And here's a quirky historical tidbit for you. In old German households, it was common to leave out a bowl of cream or bread at night, not just for stray cats, but for household spirits called kobolds. Forget to feed them, and you risked spoiled milk or mysteriously broken tools. Leave them a treat, and they'd guard your home. The shoemaker's instinct to set out leather feels like part of that same tradition, a way of saying, I remember you, I still believe in you. The villagers sometimes tease him for it. Old man, waiting for your elves again, they laugh, and he chuckles, nods, and replies, maybe, but until they return, I've got my own two hands. That line alone becomes something like a proverb in town, repeated by apprentices when work gets tough. Strange, isn't it? How a man once pitied becomes a figure of quiet wisdom. And you'd probably find yourself smiling too if you were in that little shop. Imagine stepping inside on a snowy evening, the smell of warm leather and candle wax wrapping around you. The shoemaker looks up from his bench, his wife glances over from her sewing, and suddenly you're not just a customer, you're part of the story. For a moment, you catch yourself wondering, if you left your boots on the counter tonight, would they come alive with new stitches by dawn? But the truth, as always, is both simpler and more magical. The elves' gift wasn't just shoes. It was resilience, kindness, and the reminder that unseen hands, whether elfin, human, or simply the luck of life, can carry you through the darkest hours. And that kind of gift doesn't vanish with time. It multiplies.
And so the shoemaker's story stretches beyond the small village, carried in whispers and retellings across towns and markets. Traveling merchants pick it up, weaving it into fireside chatter. Children beg to hear it again before bed, wide-eyed as they imagine nimble fingers darting across scraps of leather. Some even leave out their own tiny offerings, nuts, sweets, or scraps of cloth, hoping that perhaps the elves might visit them too. What's fascinating is how adaptable the tale is. In one version, collected by the Brothers Grimm, the shoemaker and his wife live happily ever after, their prosperity secure thanks to the elves' gift. But in Scandinavian variants, the beings are not elves at all, but nis or tomt, little house spirits in wool caps who prefer porridge left on the hearth. Meanwhile, in Celtic lore, you might hear of the Leonin Sea, fairy folk who bring inspiration to artisans, though often at a strange price. Each culture shapes the helpers to fit its own household rhythms, as if every land whispers, yes, magic lives here too. The shoemaker himself never tries to correct the rumors. He doesn't insist that his helpers were German elves, or that they were small, or even that they wore shoes at all. He lets the details blur and soften like watercolor on damp parchment. After all, a story doesn't weaken when it shifts. It grows. And the shoemaker, humble as ever, seems to understand that the gift was never meant to stay locked inside his four walls. Still, in the privacy of his own thoughts, he remembers. He remembers the first night he woke to find work finished, his astonishment at the flawless stitches, the way his wife clasped her hands in wonder. He remembers the little garments she sewed, folded neatly like offerings, and the emptiness of the workbench the morning after. And most of all, he remembers the gratitude that filled him so strong it felt like a new pair of shoes for the soul, carrying him forward one step at a time. The years roll on, and eventually the shoemaker and his wife pass into memory themselves. But the tale, the tale endures. Some say their shop remained blessed, that new shoemakers who inherited the bench found unexpected luck in their trade. Others claim the elves moved on, visiting other struggling craftsmen in need of a miracle. And perhaps, if you listen closely, you might hear that tapping of invisible hammers somewhere else in the world tonight too. It's a soothing thought, isn't it? That kindness, once given, doesn't vanish, it travels. Maybe that's why we keep telling this story, again and again, in bedtime books, in libraries, in whispered retellings like this one. Because deep down, we all want to believe that unseen helpers might come when our strength falters. And perhaps more importantly, we want to remember to be helpers ourselves, to offer a stitch of kindness to those who stumble. So, as you drift toward sleep now, let the shoemaker's humble workshop settle into your imagination. Picture the wooden bench, the neat rows of tools, the faint glow of the fire, and the memory of laughter that still lingers in the air. Imagine the rustle of tiny feet you almost but not quite hear. Feel the comfort of knowing that, whether by magic, luck, or human hands, help has a way of arriving just when it's needed most. And maybe, as your eyelids grow heavy, you'll smile at the thought that tonight, yes, even tonight, you're not alone in your journey. Someone, somewhere, is stitching invisible threads of kindness into your life, as quietly and patiently as the elves once stitched shoes by moonlight. Sleep well, dear listener. May your dreams be lined with soft leather, stitched with golden thread, and carried gently toward morning.
The shoemaker's tale comes to rest at last, and with it, a gentle hush spreads through the imaginary village you've been walking in all this time. The workshop door closes softly, as though it has decided it has shared enough secrets for one night. You linger outside a moment longer, hearing the faint memory of tools clinking and shoes tapping on the cobblestones. Then, slowly, the sound fades, leaving only stillness, like the pause after a lullaby. What do we take away from this story? Perhaps it's the simple reminder that generosity never disappears. It echoes, shaping lives far beyond what we can see. Or maybe it's the reassurance that help can arrive in the most unexpected forms, whether tiny beings in pointed hats or neighbors who lend a hand when times are rough. Folklorists still debate whether the elves were meant to symbolize fate, divine intervention, or simply the power of gratitude turned outward. But honestly, at this stage in the evening, it's much more comforting to imagine them exactly as they appear, darting, laughing, impossibly quick, stitching away under moonlight. There's also the playful debate about shoes themselves. Historians point out that shoemakers, more than any other tradesman, carried both symbolism and practicality. They literally shaped the way people walked through life. And in some tellings, elves represent that unseen craftsmanship, the little extra detail that transforms ordinary leather into something that carries you smoothly across cobblestones, through seasons, even into new adventures. A shoe is never just a shoe. It's a vessel of journeys, a quiet metaphor that we're all being carried forward step by step. And so the story has wound its thread around you, 15 stretches of gentle narrative woven together like the shoemaker's stitches, pulling you closer to rest. If you feel the weight in your eyes now, that's exactly as it should be. The tale has done its job.
Let everything slow down now. The pace eases like a stream reaching a quiet bend. Each detail of the shoemaker's shop fades into soft shadow. The wooden counter smooth from years of use, the shelves stacked neatly with scraps of leather, the faint warmth of the fire that glows low in the hearth. You step back from the workshop, leaving it behind like a dream you're carrying into your own night. Your breath grows deeper, calmer. With each inhale, imagine drawing in the warmth of the shoemaker's gratitude. With each exhale, let go of the small tensions gathered through the day. You've been walking along cobblestones, wandering through the hush of candlelit rooms, listening for invisible footsteps. But now, at last, it is time to rest your own. Picture yourself slipping into shoes softer than silk, lighter than clouds, carrying you not into work, not into errands, but into a meadow of rest. The grass is cool, the stars above are unhurried, and every sound is hushed. You can almost hear the elves again, not working this time, but singing faintly, like lullabies carried on the wind. The shoemaker's gratitude becomes your own. The kindness he felt wraps around you like a blanket stitched from unseen hands. It holds you gently, reassuring you that the world is not so heavy tonight. You are safe. You are cared for. And just as the shoemaker discovered, help often comes when you least expect it. So close your eyes, let the last flicker of candlelight slip away, and allow yourself to drift. The stitches of this story are complete, and they carry you softly toward morning. Good night, dear dreamer. Sweet dreams await. Sweet dreams await. Sweet dreams await. Sweet dreams await.